just going to go ahead and start recording now. You good with that?
I'm as good as I'm gonna get, man.
All right. Well, welcome to the very first episode of Rep, the Reverse Engineering Plus Plus show. Your co hosts are me, Aaron, and
No,
off to a smashing
I took
start.
that cue terribly.
So, yeah, in this show, we just wanted to talk about a couple things. The first was introduce ourselves a little bit and then talk about what our motivation is for this show and in comparison with some of the other ones that there are out there, and then talk shop a little bit about some of our favorite types of tooling and whatnot as it applies to reverse engineering. And I'm sure all sorts of things outside of reverse engineering, hence the name of the show. So, first up, there's me. I'm Aaron. Um, I have been kicking around with all sorts of electronic miscellanea since the 90s. I think that my very first hack, if you want to call it that, or my very first thing that I think motivated me to be interested in looking to computer systems down at a deeper level was Web TV. I think that was the very first one. Do you remember the Web TV?
Oh man, I do. My sister had one.
So yeah, growing up as a not very advantaged young lad, we didn't quite have a full computer yet, but the internet age was a coming, and the Web TV was marketed for those who are not in the know as kind of like a set-top box that you'd hook up to your phone line and then dial up to Web TV services, and you'd essentially hook it up over the component cables to your TV, and it would allow you internet access, I guess. And in those days, and kicking around on it, and just generally being one of those curious young guys who wanted to push the big red button and tear apart basically everything that I had electronics wise. There were just some hidden access codes, nothing that blows anybody's hairs back to get in there and mess around with some settings. And then I think shortly after that, I was starting to pick up or understand, know a little bit more on frack and whatnot. I didn't have any kind of computer programming skills or anything to mention, but I picked up, I think, one of those at one of the bookstores that was near us. Oh man, what was that bookstore that recently closed down here not too long ago?
Not Barnes and Noble. The other one, Borders.
Borders. I think it was
Did
a
Borders
Borders.
close?
Yeah, it was a Borders or something similar to that, where I had taken a look at that. And anyway, fast forward, my senior year, we had to do this thing in my English class where you had to do like this long research paper, which was problem based. And one of my neighbors was a programmer for Sally Mae and showed me about the Morris worm, and I thought that was awesome. So yeah, I ended up starting off school there in computer engineering, which a long time later ended up getting wrapped up in computer science and spent some time. I wandered into a band of wayward lads, and that's where I met you, Dell. Um,
I remember.
yeah, what was that now? How many years ago?
Oh shit, that was around what 2007, so 15ish.
Man, that's hard to believe sometimes, but
Makes it
yeah.
sound a lot older than I'm ready for. But yeah,
Yeah, about 15
like
years
damn
ago.
it.
And we were kicking around at the time doing some cool telephony stuff and time division multiplexing and all sorts of fun nerdery. But that is about me in a nutshell. I think that as time's gone on, the tools have changed, but the attitude remains the same. I like to peek, poke, and prod all of the bits. And nowadays, it's just a little bit different resources, a little bit different technology. Um, yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. Tell the folks about you, Dell.
So for me, I have always been interested in electronics and everything since a very young age. I remember my brother had this really cool kit, like one of my first, like I'm interested in technology. Was my brother had this like weird kit. It was like a cardboard and plastic electronics kit that had these like little springs and wires, and it was almost like a solderless breadboard, but instead of like putting them down in there and it's got the little clamp in it, it had springs that you pulled down, and it had projects to like make radios and stuff. And I always wanted one of those, and I never got one, and my brother was never interested in his, so I played with his a little bit. That's kind of what got me started. We also had a really old Atari that my dad had like saved from my grandma's house, and it had a keyboard on it, and I think it was like a 2600 XL or something. and you could program in BASIC. So my dad started teaching me some of the basics of BASIC, and from the time I was about 8, that was probably what really kind of got me into programming. And I did absolutely nothing with it until I started getting into high school, because eventually the Atari broke and we had old Commodore 64. I think like 10 or 11 years after they were something big, and I didn't have the chance to get into that stuff. But I did eventually, once I got into high school, start getting into computers and programming really heavily. I got myself into some trouble at school. I don't know if I've ever told this story before, but I got caught like logging into the school gateway from home, which at the time I had no idea what to do with. Right, I was just like, "What is this? Like, this is no command line I've ever seen before. This isn't the command prompt, as it were." And I had no idea what I was doing, and I had a random file where I kept the interesting addresses I found on the school network, and one of them was like the domain controller, which was also acting as a file server. So I was like digging around through random stuff in the domain controller. This is like 2001, 2002 era. And I absolutely got caught like a dipshit. So like spent some time in the principal's office explaining like who my ISP was, and like what I was doing with files pointed at the domain controller. And I remember there was a kid in my school named Ian that was way better than I was, and I was always trying to catch up to him, I feel like. Um, but yeah, so that's my high school computer teacher. I'm sure remembers me at least a little bit in that regard. But then yeah, I started working on my college degree and stuff, and I've honestly just general programs at that point. I would say I really got really into electronics probably the 2008 2009 timeframe, when I stumbled on Arduino and it became really accessible. Which is about the time that we started hanging out and working on stuff at work, as well as working on home projects and stuff like that together. And it's really only taken off from there. Where I started getting into embedded devices that I really like to mess with that. I enjoy programming like x86, Python, and stuff like that. But embedded devices, I would say, is probably really where my interest lies for some reason. I'm not
Yeah,
sure why. Bare metal stuff like that has always been better to me.
same here. I mean, I think that pure physics or EE has never quite done it for me. And then I've found myself more often than not higher up the stack and really doing some more penetration testing like things too. But that almost doesn't satisfy me either. There's a happy medium in there somewhere, at the lower level that really scratches that itch for me. I know as it does for you. You brought up that pigboard. I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember having a similar type of thing too that like a grandpa got me or something like that. It was a radio that you could assemble together. It might have been from Radio Shack or somewhere like that. And that actually probably was the very first thing at that kind of like lower level that kind of made me realize that that itch was a scratch that I needed to assuage, to put it, I guess, one
Yeah.
way. But yeah, fast forward all those years now, and then man, we have gotten involved as we've been talking here. We have gotten involved in so much, and I do remember those days, the 2008 days, where you were taking over the world one Wiimote at a time.
Oh man, I forgot about that. I used to connect so many things to Wii nunchucks.
But yeah,
I drove servos with that one time. That was a good time, and I never had any project that kind of came to fruition with like a good use case for that. But God, it was fun learning. That was like my introduction to I squared C.
yeah, I remember that, and I think that too. Something that I vaguely remember at the time was having you had the problem where you had to deal with maybe a stepper or something like that where you had to divide two numbers and the math wasn't working out. You didn't have the data type, I think, available to you to be able to work out the math, and you just multiplied it by like 10,000 or something like that to be able to get the numbers, the math to be able to work out, to be able to move things at the right increments. Do you remember that?
Like vaguely, not as well as you're remembering it, which is unfortunate. But I do kind of remember that because I ran into a lot of like data type problems, especially on the Arduino. You know what I mean? Like I feel like the data types on the Arduino aren't always as um, straightforward as I felt like they could be. But I don't know. It's not really a big deal. But yeah, I struggled with that, especially at the beginning. I was like, yeah, like what? Why isn't this a big moving as much as I wanted? Right, especially with servos. I can't remember with stepper motors. Like what kind of stepper motor was I playing with it back then?
I'm just getting the high
Oh,
wave points
you
of
know
my
what?
vague memories. Yeah.
I ripped those out of a printer, right? Like I had found a
Oh
printer at
yeah.
the recycling area
Yep.
and I ripped those out of a printer. And I counted the steps, dude. Like I had to mark where they were at and I turned it to count the steps. I
That's
couldn't
right.
find the part numbers. The internet was different back then.
It was. I think too, which is hard to wrap your mind around now. I've been involved with some youth teaching for hacky skills and things like that, and there's all sorts of robotics clubs and things like that now. And it's easy for me sometimes to, I don't know if be salty is the right word, but if some of the resources that existed today existed back when I was a young lad, I think that would have been catapulting, my career into this space forward much sooner. I'm glad that they exist today. I wouldn't want it to be withheld from, young people to have to go through what I had to go through, so to speak, or anything like that. But man, the internet was a different place. And I think during my time out there, my first foray into Arduino, there was a Make magazine. I'm gonna have to try to see if I can look it up and look in the show notes for it. But there's a Make magazine where a guy had his sketch uploaded to one of their websites, and what it was a project that had glasses uh, with an Arduino attached to them. And what it would do, it would blink lights as well as make some auditory noises that were at the different wavelengths. I think wavelengths, and it was supposed to just be like this fun experience where like you look to see how it felt. A little bit weird in retrospect, but for some reason that really, I don't know, sang to me. So I picked that up and
I totally remember that project. I remember you showing me that one time after work. I think we were talking about lucid dreaming or something like that, and you had showed me those. I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. I feel like.
yeah, I'll definitely look that up and see if I can throw it into the show notes just for the nostalgia. And that was kind of the first Make magazine was just starting up too, which I think is back now, but for a short amount of time had kind of gone the way of the buffalo.
Yeah. So I can't remember like what happened in there, and I didn't get a chance to really get into Make magazine. Um, because I think they used to have Colin, what's his name too, right? All the time. What's that guy's name?
The only person who
Colin.
Colin coming to mind for me is Colin Furze, the guy who made the British guy who made the backyard underground facility that you can access through the garden shed. Not that guy, but I think I know who you're talking about. The guy with
Yeah.
glasses.
Yep. He does stuff for Adafruit now, I think, and at the time he did stuff also for MakeZine. Uh, and Colin, no, this isn't the guy. I don't think. Oh, it is Colin Cunningham.
Yeah, Colin Cunningham.
Um,
Yeah, who is kind of I think one of the first people who I had seen out there is kind of one of those celebrity maker types, if you want to call it that. Obviously, you mentioned Adafruit, Lemore Freed, and Adafruit is a huge name in that space now. But I do remember around that time she was kind of new and out there too. She had just come off, I think, of like a master's at MIT and had made the what was it called, like Blink Be Gone or something like that, or TV Be Gone.
no, no, no. So the TV Be Gone, and her master's thesis was on GPS or cell phone jamming or GPS jamming. I can't remember which, but I think it was cell phone jamming and TV Be Gone because her master's thesis was at the Media Lab, I think, and it had to do with like um, something like social interactions or something like that, right? Like
Yeah,
too many like stimuli out in the public. But
defensive social
yeah,
interactions.
she is definitely
I think is what it was.
yes, that's a good way to describe it.
Which I guess is kind of was kind of prescient, really.
Uh,
Little did we know that we would have all the many data streams of news and whatnot constantly berating us. But I'm sure her, similar to a coworker of ours who had blocked a particular thing, to the chagrin of some others, was probably some of the motivation behind it.
No, I absolutely agree, and like I feel like for sure that stumbling upon Lamore Freed's stuff definitely changed kind of the vector of where I was going for electronics and stuff.
Yeah,
Because I was just kind of piddling around with things, but she kind of got me on the track toward Arduino and stuff. I had found a video of her and somebody, maybe the dude she's married to, whose name I'm spacing right now, um, like repurposing an old. what you call it, payphone to like work normal again.
Yeah.
And this just popped into my head. I feel like I shared this video with you, and in my head I was like on Slack, and I was like, no, back then I would have shared it on Stumble Upon.
Stumble upon. Oh
um,
man, R.I.P. Garrett. What was his
right,
last name? Oh man, that guy was great though. That Stumble upon that
he
is.
was.
And then I gotta make sure that I stop myself from getting off in too many side tangents here. But yeah, I do remember that. Philip, I think is her husband's name. Philip Tyrone.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, I always forget because now on the like on their YouTube channel they just call him Mr. Lady Ada, I think is what they call him. So like that's
Yeah.
in my head. That's what I just want to keep calling him.
I still love her Ask an Engineer days, and generally, nearly everything that she puts out is awesome. I like that she's got the kid video series and stuff like that now too. Cappy the Capacitor and all the supporting cast.
I was just actually looking at some of those right now. I think the one that I like the best is the kind of off the cuff one, Deska Lady Ada. It
Yeah,
is just absolutely astounding to me, like if that woman can just like sit down and she's like, all right, we're just porting a bootloader for blah blah blah, and she's just switching back and forth between the data sheet and code and just going through it like it's nothing. It feels like on the video anyway, and it's always amazing to me to kind of watch that. I'm just like, holy crap.
yeah. I will,
If I could get half of that, I'd probably be happy with my life.
which I think is also important to bring up. Neither one of us is professional forward engineers, um, but we do work in
Nope.
sometimes being sort of good at tearing things apart, which is a lot of fun, and I love every second of it. But yeah, I mean, really, for her, for forward engineering, yeah, but anybody who's a master of their craft like she is, watching them work and being able to get that insight for free is just chef's kiss.
Oh, absolutely. Again, that sort of stuff and those kind of videos are what kind of it drew me back to electronics. I feel like from a life of just playing World of Warcraft and Guitar Hero 3 at the time.
Still a good time, but yeah, I understand the sentiment of what you're saying completely. Did you want to talk format of the show a little bit and what we hope to, I guess, get across, or the things that we plan on talking about for the would-be listener?
Absolutely.
So it's not settled. is the real, is the real honest to goodness truth. I think a lot of it
Moral of the
is
story: we don't have one.
most of our interactions end up veering to the topic of like nerdy things, and it's usually either like it's crazy. It can go from materials properties to electronics engineering. Radio is a really common one between us two, along with man 3D printing, you name it. If it beep boop bops, we've probably talked about it. And so I think we kind of thought we like to talk about this a lot, and there's a lot of people who end up getting around our sphere who like to talk about it too. And so we wanted to share some of our insights about reverse engineering, and the plus plus is all of that other stuff that I brought up, stuff from computer programming and maybe even like pen test type RE or malware type RE, software defined radio, material properties. And I think we'll probably have different formats to talk about those different things. One format I envision seeing is you and I just talking shop like we usually do, which I think, if nothing else is successful that we do, I think we'll definitely be successful on that front. Then another would be where we are learning something and we pick up a tidbit or a nugget of knowledge that is worth sharing. I'm not so sure yet if I'm going to go like do anything live with that, but I do think that if nothing else, we might be able to share that out on our website, which is repp.show. Uh, and then the last kind of thing, once or if we're successful in getting some of our kind of idols in these different spaces on the show, would be doing interviews, with some of the people out there. You got anything to add to that?
No, I think that all sounds really great, and I love the idea, all of that stuff. I also realize that I've been sitting here like nodding my head, yeah, like in agreement. Like anybody that hears this is going to be able to see me doing that. I have to feel like I'm going to have to get used to kind of how to reply like in the affirmative without like interrupting things, but also in a way that's like meaningful for somebody to hear. instead of just sitting over here nodding my head like an idiot.
I think it would be cool too if we could set up like a GitLab or something to that point. There was a recent project that I was playing around with that might be a future topic, not too far in the distance of an episode, getting involved with doing emulation, hardware emulation, because it's not great to be able to jump into GDB or IDA or Ghidra and have to deal with something that came off of some sort of spy flash. All of that tooling is usually more in support of like the user space programs, your typical x86 ELF or um, executable, Windows executable. And so library identification and loading, all that stuff is nice in that space. But I think the embedded world, there's definitely a lot of room and a lot of things left, uh, I guess, to the reader to figure out. But I think a GitLab would be cool.
Yeah, I really, especially as we've been doing some of the stuff at work and things like that. On that front, I would love to have a like a QEMU add-on for Ghidra where you can kind of make a custom chip, um,
Yep.
and define different spaces, or a known chip or something like that, where um, you can just like step through a program like with Ghidra right there, but like launch it while tied to QEMU. I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah, like an interactive debugger. I was thinking on that front, it would be pretty cool
Yeah.
to tie in some of the work that's been done with Unicorn. And I know Capstone is usually involved with that too, or maybe it's that Capstone is what drives Unicorn, but in any event, having some sort of interactive debugger to go alongside of it, especially for embedded stuff, would be super useful. I just time and time again, dynamic testing for quick answers is typically the way to go. I'm not hating on static RE at all, and it's definitely necessary a lot of the time, but for quick answers, man, you can't beat dynamic.
Well, I think that too, and especially for quick answers, but also for me, the thing that I don't get out of, especially embedded type systems from static analysis, is like context on the situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's tougher for me to follow. It's like, okay, it just takes this buffer and it does this with the first byte and this with the second byte, this with the third byte. Like, man, I want to see some data in here, and seeing the data manipulated is um, definitely something that is important for me.
Same. What's so tough in addition to the tools themselves not really being great supporters of all of the different types of libraries for literally everything embedded system out there that's created. And for in some cases it's like, would it be reasonable to try to for them to really be all of that? How much of the work should be done by the reader and how much work should be done by them? I think it's nice to add to like the corpus of things over time, but the reality of the situation is that embedded world, even if you do add those additional bits, is going to be challenging, especially with so many systems on a chip these days having multiple cores and doing certain things implicitly that you just don't have insight into unless you can tap some sort of line. I mean, well, even with a system on a chip, it can be nearly impossible to tap one of those lines to truly see. So you have to rely on black box to some point, but doesn't mean we can't get better for the tooling that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that'd be great, especially because, like you were saying, with systems on a chip, like, all right, well, it's just writing a random value to this memory area. Is that is that like memory map.io? Is that a bug? Like, what is this?
Yeah, into
So digging into that stuff can be difficult.
so many times in Ghidra, I find myself. What's your? I'm gonna ask what your preferred nomenclature is. Mine's usually, came from this function underscore, function address. What I think it is? Question mark.
Started using the question mark heavily. I was like, could be this thing? Question mark. I try to comment, like throw comments in there about what I was kind of thinking at the time, because my brain is really contextual, my memory is super contextual, but also at the same time I come back and read those later and I'm like, I don't know what the fuck this guy was talking about. It's just,
Who wrote
I'm
this?
gonna have to
Like
do
who
this over
edited
again and
last?
hope for
Oh,
the
it was
best.
me. Those are my initials. Okay, cool.
This guy has no idea what's going on. Oh, that's my comment.
We were talking about this a little bit before the show too, but I love to take notes. The problem with that though is that I will take some notes in Joplin, I'll take some notes in graph paper notebooks that we have kicking around, and then I'll take some on like a personal confluence. And I don't really have one note taking place to rule them all. So I can spend 2 hours trying to remember where it was that I did write down the thing. I really am starting to like the flow though of Joplin a lot better in trying to organize and keep track a lot of that. The thing that Joplin though is missing that is nice in something like OneNote is the ability to arbitrarily drop files in and the layout for it to be arbitrary too, because with Joplin it's all marked down, which is fine. You can have it
Hmm.
all in line, but it just limits like how much of the screen real estate is devoted to text versus a picture. So if somebody out there happens to hear this at some point and has some recommendations for me, that would be great. But also on the front of taking notes and stuff like that too, for those who don't, have the I guess the pleasure of working with me or lack thereof, I can be
Let's
very
say it's a
verbose.
pleasure.
So my notes, especially, everybody gets very EB, white and strong elements of style about how you should be marking up your Ghidra. And I tend to go with a lot of pre-comments, and they tend to be novels.
Oh man. So I bounce back and forth. My problem I feel like with taking notes is that I take one of two types of notes, and I take neither of them as often as I should. One of them will be like hyper verbose, right? Like I'm going to shift this to the left by 1 bit, and since a byte is 8 bits, that's going to leave the bottom 7 bits. So I can put another bit down here in the bottom bit, and da 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 da. And like I'll write a novel on why the architecture is like that. And then like 9 lines away, like something really important and complicated will be happening, and I'll take some notes that I'm convinced I'll know what it's going to be later, and they'll just be like half-word shenanigans, right?
Yeah.
Like thing fed to other thing and stuff with some things, and I'll
This,
have no idea what that is later.
what that reminds me of
And like,
is
there's
that,
no middle ground. I can only take those two types.
oh my gosh, I completely understand that. It reminds me of that XKCD comment where he talks about his git commits over time, where at first it's like, git commit, made sure that I, revectored, blah, 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 blah. It's a nice comment. And then eventually it's like, I'm typing this with my hands, and then just hands. They get less and less effective over time as you're cranking through it. There's just a type of
Uh,
accountancy I think that happens where I don't know, it's like the part of your brain that is trying to account for doing all those things, and then the kind that's just trying to get to the answer that you want to, or like in conflict with each other, and neither one is patiently waiting for the other side to finish what it's doing.
right?
But yeah, um,
I I struggle with that, and I'm probably just going to continue to struggle. I think that's going to be a lifelong struggle for me.
just accept fate and move on. Yeah,
Right? Just try to mitigate it. You know what I mean? Just hope for the best.
yeah. As you all know, I recently though have started to, for especially some of my tests and things like I'm doing, I'd like to take more videos of them because I feel like that is probably with like OBS, that's the best bang for the buck in making sure that I knew exactly all of the context, what was going on for the test that I was doing at the time. Because you have something rigged up with a radio and you've got GNU radio playing and you've got something else rigged up with Ghidra and you're taking a look at that and maybe some serial commands over something, kind of Voltroning together all of those disparate pieces in something, even the best like note taking material or program or whatever, excuse me, that you have out there isn't going to be able to capture it, I think, quite like video does. So that will be good though. And then we could
Yeah.
share some of those out too, I think, to either the GitLab or just as one off notes and stuff like that with the site.
I think that would be great, as well as, I don't know, maybe somebody out there has some advice like, hey, I had the same problem as you until I blah. And, I could have a new project to abandon.
Yeah, man. I have no problem with stealing a page from somebody else's playbook. I mean, I think that's how we learn in general, right? I mean, or we just iterate a lot and
Yeah,
fail a lot.
that's definitely how I learn. I struggle to learn just like sit down, read a book, and like know that thing. I do a lot of, taking every you know road that doesn't lead to the solution along the way to figuring it out. So looking at examples is really good for me.
Yeah. Something else I bring up from time to time, but I feel is probably important to bring up is that sucking at something is the first step at getting sort of good at something. And I feel that I'm doing that a whole lot. But anyway, so
That
yeah,
take a lot of first steps.
I think that's probably good on like the potential formatting and stuff of the show, what it is that we plan on like talking about, talking shop and everything like that. On the front of talking shop, you want to talk a little shop? Do you want to get into some of your favorite tools and things like that?
Absolutely.
Um, let's
Um,
start off with hardware. Do you have any projects that you've got going on now? Do you have anything that you really prefer to use and you've forged the fires of, trying a lot of different things and failed at some and kind of converged on things that you like?
Uh, s- my projects right now are really kind of they've been a bit limited by my time. The thing I'm working on now is STM stuff. Of course, right? I've been on the STM32 Crusade, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Doing a lot of stuff. I'm still working on my Discord push to talk pedal that I had, but I wanted to find a way that you could like change what keystroke it sent for push to talk and all of that stuff. So I've been working on down the path to build a composite USB device on there and have a mass storage device where you could put a config file as well as the human interface device running at the same time.
Oh, that's a good
I've
idea.
been using some dude's project for that, Alambe 94, I guess, on GitHub. So whoever that cat is, I have no
Shout
idea.
out to Alambe.
But he's got a yeah, right. Like hats off for Alambe. Um, yeah, whatever he's got going, she's got going, whoever that is, whatever they have going. Um, it's a pack for Cube MX, and it will create a USB or USB device that's composite for you in the STM32 stuff, which is great because the stuff that STM32s come with it just doesn't actually have that support. So I've been going down that path, and it's been I don't know, mild levels of not success, but it luckily, it has its own debugger and everything. And I've got this little cheap ST Link. I'm pretty sure it's a clone.
Yeah.
I want to say I got it for $10 off of, but it's been great. And one of the other ones, so when I was working with FPGAs, I was really surprised. I had this little like $10, it's called like a USB blaster or something like that.
Yep.
Man, I have JTagged so many things with that thing.
Yeah, I
It's got to be like the cheapest JTAG thing on the planet.
how much do you know how much it costs by chance? If not, that's cool. I was gonna
Um, oh, I lost my Amazon account, so I can't check. But I don't. I want to say it was sub $20. You know what I
Oh yeah,
mean? Like
that's
it was not like uh what are they, J Link or J Tabulator type prices.
yeah, the lowest cost one that
Let
I
me see if I
currently
can
am
just
working
Google
with,
it real quick.
I think for the most part has been the Shikra. I think it's kicking around at about 45 bucks, although I don't know if you can get them anymore. It was the int3.cc site had those up for a while. I had come across them randomly on maybe a Hackaday binge or something like that. I had been following some comments on some projects that I was following and came across it, but it does JTAG, SPI, UART, I squared C. I think that's about it. It's a real small like USB interface with some GPIO on it, and that
Yeah.
guy does quite a
So
bit for the price.
um the one that I have is well, yeah. The for the price is definitely the part that gets me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
the one I have is $35 on Amazon right now. It looks like, and it only does JTAG. That's all you get
Okay. Yeah.
for my SWD stuff. I guess this ST Link is like the only thing I have for that.
I think outside of the Shikra too, I have seen. I don't know about actually doing full on JTAG itself, but I know that God, man, shout out back to what we were talking about earlier, the Arduino, because there is a guy out there who has. Oh man, I want to say his name is Cyphunk, like CYPHUNK. He has a GitHub out there, which also has a sweet Wikipedia for doing all sorts of hardware hacking, but it has some pictures and stuff on there as well on how you can use along with sketches, of course, for the Arduino to use the Arduino as a JTAG enumerator. So like a cheap man's JTAG,
Yeah.
a cheap man's JTagulator. Um, but I don't think you'd be able to do. I Well, come to think of it, maybe you can, but I haven't seen anything on the Arduino outside of the JTAG enum to be able to allow you to brute force find JTAG. And then what's the JTAG?
I haven't really either. Not, what was that?
What's the JTAG ulator going for these days? It's still like 200 and some change, or I know there's the shortages too, so I don't know if that's affected things.
Let me take a look real quick. That's another. I didn't realize that was Grand Idea Studios. Um, Let me see. Adafruit has one. Let's see what that'll set you back. Buck 99, basically $200.
Right.
Um, so that makes sense. I get it. It's definitely a great tool, but usually I am a little more funds constrained than picking up a JTagulator for $200.
Yeah, the Bus Pirate is also what, about 30 bucks?
Yes, that's what I've used for some JTAG stuff in the past. Although um, the one I have, I think, is a 3.6. It's not the 4.0 one. So it right now on Adafruit, you can pick up a Bus Pirate for $37. This sounds more like a fucking advertisement for different companies than I want it to. I just happen to be Googling these prices.
Yeah. No, I'm sure
um, but
hopefully
it,
at some point too some other people can comment on other things that they use or plug. I don't have a problem plugging anybody else's projects either for free. Just whatever is going to be the cheapest and quickest and dirtiest way is usually the preferred way for me anyway.
yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. That's how I wound up with the Bus Pirate, right? They're only $40, and I've used it for Spy as well as I Squared C. I used it to troubleshoot a TV one time, which was a good time. But yeah, I don't know. I like my little Bus Pirate. I'm not 100% sure where it's at right now, but um, I have to say that like between the Bus Pirate, the Arduino, and what was that super cheap Flash programmer we have, the 826 Alpha or whatever. I feel like I've been able to accomplish quite a few things.
I would say that it would be nice to pick up a one of the Sega J Links. I think those run upwards of about $1,000. I think the benefit there is what you can just upload the BSDL files and stuff like that too if you have them.
Yeah.
Which,
Um,
for the would-be JTagger out there who maybe isn't as familiar or experienced in doing hardware-related reverse engineering, um, if you can find JTAG, it's a great time. And the reason that it's a great time is because if you have the ability to interact with the CPU and dump memory while it's running, then you can answer all those questions that we had brought up earlier, or we had talked about lamenting earlier, where you have something dumped off a flash inside of Ghidra looking at it statically or ITER or whatever your preferred tool is. And there's a lot of questions because there will be references in the code to areas of memory that are only loaded during the runtime, or certain parts of the code base itself are reloaded, dynamically to different parts of memory too in normal operation. So,
Also,
Jake,
just
go ahead.
seeing data come in and like how that works, right? Like I feel like doing static analysis off in a situation where I can see data, right, and be looking at static analysis and working with a processor dynamically, like, oh, this is an interesting point. I want to see what's happening here, um, and I think it should be doing this because Ghidra's not perfect, right? It
Yeah.
makes mistakes all the time. So sometimes I've run into situations where we're like, oh, we thought it was doing this, but not quite. Ghidra just got it wrong.
Yeah, for sure. Because
Also,
it's
J
a
links range anywhere from $400 to $1,000.
okay. Yeah. I would like to pick one of those up for my house, but I don't think that I'll be doing that anytime soon. Or at least, I'm for the most part for the stuff that I'm usually pulling apart at home, it's much less difficult usually to get IoT devices that are like a home router or something like that. So outside of JTAG too, obviously being able to read off SPI flash or even having UART if it's still enabled, seeing some serial stream stuff coming out is nice.
Oh, definitely.
And
Um, Interacting with serial, right? Even if you can, like, even if you can't send data back, just getting serial from something, especially while it starts up. I feel like
Yep.
everything wants to brag about what software it's running the second it starts up. You know what I mean? So that can open up a lot of doors and really give you a lot of stuff as far as looking other places, like where to look for vulnerabilities and shit like that.
Well, what's nice with it too, usually if you do have a boot UART that you're seeing, you might be able to see where in memory it's loading the program, which can be great then to inform Ghidra so that it actually has the starting point of the code at the right spot. So all of the other references that it's talking about like are good relative offsets, or they're more reflective of where other things are actually in memory.
Yeah, and I don't know. Dynamic analysis is definitely the thing for me. I enjoy it. Static analysis, of course, is not a bad tool, but I feel like I always get the most out of dynamic analysis, even if sometimes all it is just like those small dopamine hits from finding something you think is interesting along the way.
Yes, I do. It's because it's a big slog, and I feel like it's sloggier when you're dealing with it statically. Although, for some reason, I personally feel like when you do get it inside of static and it works out really well, and then it's made it to where when you get to dynamic testing, it moves it along really quick. Those are kind of some big dopamine hits for me. But in either event, it's going to be a slog usually at some point.
You always have to slog through something.
But I think outside of the Shikra and doing JTAG Spy, UART, I squared C, um, I can't think off the top of my head if there's anything else kind of in that space that's capable of doing as much. Of course, like I said, the Arduino 2 is capable of doing quite a bit. Uh, Cyflunk and I know some other people have some great sketches up there. There's a really recent, I want to say Hacker News, so news.y Combinator news, where I think I had shared it with you, maybe over Slack or somewhere else, where it was talking about some of the hacky ways you can get by with doing like um, multi-processing stuff in Arduino. I want to play around with that a little
I
bit
do
more.
remember that.
Yeah, because that could be lead to some interesting sketches too. I think for the Arduino to help use as a tool for doing hardware RE. Um,
Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting. But like, I don't know. Like, I feel like 16 megahertz isn't really very fast. Like
that's true. Yeah,
multi-threading on there seems like it's going to be rough. Um,
yeah,
but
for sure.
yeah, I've been surprised before though, so I really hope that it's better than I'm imagining it in my head.
Because I think it would be cool, like even if you could get one of the clones, or what's the lowest you've seen in Arduino? I think I've seen clones for as low as like maybe $5 or somewhere around there.
Yeah, 5-10 bucks. Usually the Sane Smart specials is
Yep.
where I see that kind of stuff happening. Um, that's about as far down as I'm willing to go. I guess I imagine there's some place you could get them for a little bit cheaper than that, but God only knows what chip it's going to have in it. You know what I mean?
Sure. I think
Maybe
if you
Frank's random microcontroller. So
with extra baked in goodness, I think that the I've seen the 328 Ps for pretty cheap at bulk, and then I know that there have been some people who've if you have it coming already with the bootloader on and you throw on a couple of additional hardware pieces, you can have kind of your own hacky version for pretty inexpensive. But I feel if you're doing that, you're probably going to want to make it into a PCB, at which point you're probably going to be designing a PCB and spending that time and then sending it off for fab unless you have some sort of mechanism or machine to make it yourself, at which point you're probably spending 5, 10, 15, $20, which point you might as well just buy the clone.
yeah, even the dork board, which doesn't even come with like a USB port, right? You have to plug into it with a FTDI chip or something like that. Like it only goes as low as $5. So
Yeah,
um, I think that's really the lower limit. And even then, I try to be careful with the clones and only get them from certain places because
right.
there's that whole FTDI gate thing, right? Where FTDI was finding um, counterfeit FTDI chips and then bricking them if they weren't
That's
genuine,
right.
and
Yeah.
people had no idea, right? Like they thought they had genuine chips. So I try to be careful about that stuff, but you never know.
Yeah, I do remember that. It kind of harkens back to the Sony hack days, DRM related stuff.
Oh God, right? Yeah, it came with a rootkit. I forgot about that.
Good time. I think actually you and
Thanks a
I
lot, Sony.
had once upon a time, was it at DEF CON 23? We had attended, what is his name? Aja's class, the C++ for hackers class. And in it,
Yep.
he had talked about his early days, and he was the one who found, although he had some pretty like heavy legalese disclaimers and stuff like that, he's the one who was able to break the encryption for those early days, the early DRM stuff, right, on CDs, or was it DVDs, or both?
It was DVDs. So it was specifically, I think, the encryption for like commercial movie DVDs, right? Because it came basically they did it. I don't know. I don't want to say dumb, but I don't know. Maybe a little dumb. I think they basically um there was just like a private key or a public key, something like that, that like every DVD player got, and he was able to get in there and get it or something. Um,
That's right.
and yeah, it just it always kind of reminded me, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but the Xbox hacks back in the day, right? Like basically the encryption key to decrypt the stuff for stuff to start would just come off of a chip that wasn't on die, and they just assumed that nobody'd ever be able to sniff the bus because it was so fast, right? It was like a Celeron, and it was like some new bus that they thought was too fast for anybody to sniff. And like I think a year after it came out or something, somebody absolutely was able to sniff it and just read the key straight off the bus.
Yeah, I think that Bunny Huang, Andrew Huang, the guy who wrote Hacking the Xbox, talks about it a bit in that one, which I've never made it through cover to cover. Um, I do think that there was a DEF CON CTF challenge a couple years ago that had kind of randomly in there some like Xbox hacking, which I thought was pretty interesting and fun. But that guy, Bunny Huang, had gone on to write a couple other books too, The Hardware Hacker, where he's talking about making the Chumby and other things like that. But he talks about it, I think, in there. I do remember that. Although I don't think I've ever actually got involved in messing around with one myself. Do you still have an Xbox kicking around? Maybe it could be a project.
Not an original. I do have some 360s. I tried to hack one of my 360s, and it didn't work out well. But the way you hack it, I think, if I remember correctly, is still through the JTAG port, right? So you got to read some stuff out of the firmware on the CD-ROM or the DVD-ROM drive. You have to write some stuff back. You basically hack the firmware in the CD-ROM drive, which or the DVD-ROM drive for the 360, which effectively kind of just tells the CPU like, hey, this disk is legit.
Right.
Not like Wii level easy, right? Like they made the password to the COM port password, labeled it on the board, but um,
I think in addition to JTAG, UART, and stuff like that, some other tooling to kind of pop the stack back to earlier point of our conversation. I really love the Celier Logic 8, 8 channel logic analyzer, up to 100 megasamples per second, I think. And that drops off depending on how many lines it is that you're actively using. But we've used some of those at, not the 8, but we've used some of those at work as well. And I really dig using the Logic software to be able to capture those and mark them up and make comments and things like that too. Do you have other things you typically use for as a logic analyzer when you're looking at lines?
so I do. The first thing I want to say is, while I love the Logic software for the Salier, I don't know, however we're supposed to say that.
Mm-hmm.
I hate every form of file it saves as.
Yeah, the data formats.
Like I don't know what I expected. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, I've really struggled with that, as I think you've seen it work. But honestly, the biggest thing that I use for anything resembling a logic analyzer is typically either just a Arduino reading pins really fast and printing them out somewhere, or my scope. Right, I've got the Rigol 1054 hacked to 100 megahertz, and with all of the serial port and SPI and all of that stuff enabled, so it's kind of almost like a MSO.
which is
Um,
great to mention, by the way. If
that's what
anybody
I use a lot of it for.
would be out there on the market for a home gamer O-scope, almost kind of approaching the pro gamer type of models, the 1054Z, right, is has most of its additional functionality just soft locked, right? And it's almost arbitrarily easy to enable all the other features.
Yeah, and it's almost like they encourage it. You know what I mean? Like it has been absolutely hacked wide open for the. I God, I swear I bought mine 5 years ago now,
Yeah.
and they just do not seem interested in closing that hole. They're like, yeah, the people that are going to pay for it are going to pay for it, and the people that aren't, whatever. Like at least they're buying something from us. Um, so I pretty much everybody I know buys the 1054Z and hacks it to the 1100Z or
Yeah.
1104Z, whatever it is. Um, and that's exactly what I did too. And it was trivially easy. I think I ran some sketchy software on a VM and then put a code into something or something like that, and it was good to go. And it's got like really good computer support too, right? You can download the Rigol software and like pull it up and save those traces and some of that stuff on your PC instead of like USB ferrying it back and forth, which I thought was great.
Yeah, I think that it also has, I don't think I've ever done it, but are you talking about doing that over the Ethernet or over USB?
I did it through USB and had um, pretty good success that way.
Yeah, I had always planned on checking a look at the like wire sharking, like the actual line going across to just take a look at it and see what the format looks like, but I haven't done that yet, and that could be another good little mini project to do just to talk about. But yeah, net story there is that for a home gamer guy, soft unlocking it to 100 megahertz, having 4 channel, basically MSO, like you said, it's nice to have. And I think it's, what are those guys, like 300, $400?
Yeah, I think 350 for mine. Might as well just Google it at this point.
Yeah.
Rigol 1054Z. Z, as some might say. What are they on Amazon right now? They are running 419. I think I got mine on sale.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um, Outside of that, we haven't really talked too much about SDR yet. What are you liking these days on the hardware software side for SDR?
Well, so I still have the trusty old RTL SDR laying around for just kind of doing sketch stuff on the fly with it.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I'm still kind of just rocking the Hack RF. It's not quite as good as it used to be. It's still got issues. It's 10-bit or 8-bit transmit, 10-bit receive, something like that. On the
Talking about
ADC
ADC?
side, which isn't
Yeah.
great. It's yeah, it's USB 2.0, so not great. It's half duplex, so not perfect, but for the home gamer, it's not too bad if you're just trying to get into things. I think there are better solutions out there now. Um, can't remember what the cost on the Lime SDR is, but I think a lot of folks kind of have been pushing that direction as far as that goes. And I know too, Michael Osman's been working on like a daughter board to make it full duplex, but I can't remember how far any of that stuff got. That's kind of where I've been with that. As far as software, I'm still just kind of banging around on old GNU Radio and GQRX. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they're tough to beat. Or SDR Sharp also is a great program. For cheap stuff and getting into it there, but also for what you call it for piping out over to more specific programs because you're
Yeah.
not going to have a whole solution for like doing pagers or stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been the area I've been sticking in. What have you been messing around with?
Yeah, so for the most part, I've had I like you was an early adopter of the RTL SDRs just for being able to the receive only, so no transmit love there. But I think around the time that I picked that up, I had also picked up like a ham radio license and started to get into a little bit of transmit related stuff too. Right now, I've been playing around with the Pluto SDRs quite a bit. Those are the 20 megahertz instantaneous bandwidth. I think they cover about 200, 300 megahertz up to like 4 gigahertz, somewhere roughly around that range. And I've been driving those sometimes with GNU Radio Companion and sometimes with MATLAB, but not so well with MATLAB, much to my chagrin. I think that the issue there really has to be depending on what you're trying to do. Some of the stuff that exists out there expects a certain type of formatting in 64-bit real, and then what you typically have. If there's a block made for it for GNU radio, it typically allows you to do the 32-bit complex IQ. So really, it's probably just a limitation on my part in being a little bit lazy about formatting and trying to have something that works more straight away out of the box. But I've been enjoying that. Something that I haven't talked to you about yet, but I recently actually came across was a program called Inspectrum, which seems to be a signals analysis program that's pretty Gucci. And by pretty Gucci, I mean has a simple user interface and not a lot of bells and whistles. It's pretty much solely for signals analysis. I took a look at that actually last night, and it looked pretty cool. I also have some of the Nuelec receive only SDRs. I've never really pulled the trigger on like a yardstick one or anything like that. And I've never really wanted to spend the money on like a what are they, the B210s from USRP or anything like that. Because even those now
Yeah.
are I think over 1,000, and playing around with them at work, not really that great for the price point. I think there's some other people like is it Sidekick is the one, I'm not sure if that's the company name, but they do the embedded SDRs and stuff like that. I think would be cool to grab. Just haven't yet.
The that company I think is Epic, right? They make the Sidekick ones.
Oh, that's right. The model is Sidekick, but Epic, like EPIQ, is the actual company that makes the SDR. I feel like for the most
Yeah.
part, on the just kind of hacky side of things, if you look around a lot of InfoSec, you typically have people who are playing around with the Hack RF, and then you in academia you have people playing around with the Pluto, and then there's a whole other series of like super pro gamer 25K plus SDRs that only like a big business or something like that would be able to afford. And the price point's coming down on a lot of them. Some of the big boys that were sent, both transmit and receive, who were kicking around at like 5K are down to like 2.5K. But I don't know yet
The,
if
the
they're. Go ahead.
I was gonna say one of the ones that I think would be nice to pick up if I ever had the cash laying around was the Blade RF. That was one of the ones I was thinking. It's 47 megahertz to 6 gigahertz,
Oh wow,
and it'll do 61.4 megahertz sampling rate with USB 3.0. It's a little on the spendy side though at $670.
that's still not too bad though for the range really and the sampler rate.
Uh, it's not. I don't know. I would have to look a little bit more into it. I don't have the full thing here, but I don't know what the bit depth on the DACs are and everything. But
Yeah,
DACs are the ADCs. But yeah, like I would like to eventually pick something like that up to replace my Hack RF. Like one of my big complaints there is the no full duplex.
yeah, yep. The Blade RF. I think that what was one of the other companies that we were looking at not too long ago? I think we were making a big comparison sheet. Maybe I'll try to find that out and throw it maybe in the show notes or something like that. But they're definitely what the point that I'm trying to get at without knowing the names of specific companies are that there are definitely a lot of other people out there than just what you commonly hear in infosec circles, which is USRP and in academia, the Pluto, and almost everywhere else to the if you're doing receive only, the RTL SDR.
Yeah. So one of the things I've been thinking about doing is because here pretty soon I'm gonna pick up I think a Yaesu FT60 is what it is. It's a like a standard handy talkie, but it'll do um 70 centimeter and what is it like 2 meters natively, right? So you can transmit on one and receive on the other. There's no like VFO offsets or anything like that.
Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about doing is trying to do some digital work on that, where you're like I get in GNU radio or something like that and gen up a BPSK, QPSK signal, whatever it is, and then spit it out through a sound card into the audio or into the audio side of the radio and see if I could like get some good data
Oh, that's
going
cool.
on through that. I'd be kind of interested going that route using, like a just a FM transmitter, US upper sideband, what have you,
Yeah.
um, stuff that I already have basically to try to get some digital work done.
Yeah, I like the idea of doing that. I think that I saw not too long ago somebody had hacked one of the Baofeng's, maybe the 5R. This might have been a little bit while ago.
Probably the 5R.
Maybe this might have been like, come to think of it, maybe like 5 years ago. But he was able to solder directly onto the buses and CPU interface for it and turn it into kind of more of a general purpose SDR outside of the parameters for that it was designed to be worked at. And I thought that was a cool project. Try to see if I can find that out. If I can, I'll link it in the show notes too. But yeah, in terms of software for SDR, I think you mentioned SDR Sharp. So I think the lowest bar to entry, if somebody wanted to just play around with something and not be concerned about if they're, transmitting at a frequency or something like that that they shouldn't be, or they're not licensed to, the RTL SDR in combination with SDR Sharp has been one of the first things that I got involved with. And I started off by making simple like dipole antennas. Shout out to the ARRL antenna book. And then
Right.
after I had played around with that for a bit, I started making pretty large discone antennas, which are able to usually receive kind of like a large swath, much more I think than what the RTL SDR can even really accept. And I remember the time I could pick up some POCSAG radio transmissions from that. And POCSAG, for people who aren't familiar, is really kind of more of a encoding. I think that encryption can be used with it too, but a lot of times it's not. I think most people who use it, which are usually like law enforcement and hospitals and restaurants and different things like that, use it as like a one-way paging type system and just rely on the fact that it's encoded and don't turn on the encryption or anything like that. Probably because if they did set it up at some point, that person would leave the job and then they would be stuck with a system maybe that they couldn't use. But regardless of the purpose, I thought it scratched that itch for me, man. That one that we were talking about, always chasing that feeling of, I don't know, being able to see or have access to something that you would normally, kind of that spirit of hacking. And that was probably, I don't know, collectively 3 weeks worth of work. And at the time, I knew much less about radio. So I don't know, for the would be person who wants to get involved out there, I think that would be some good kit and free software to use to be able to take a look, do some of your own little sleuthing for signals analysis.
Oh yeah, if you're just trying to jump into SDR and the receive side of radio, picking up a RTL SDR, SDR Sharp, and a program called the VBA cable, I think is what it's called. I'll double check that. Um, and then just find out what VBE cable, VBE audio, that's what it's called, something like that. It allows you to make like virtual cables from one sound device to another within your computer, so you can um, you know, demod stuff or bring it down with SDR Sharp and pop it over to or pipe it over to a program that'll decode Flex for you or POXAG. That's a good place to start, right? Like get near your local hospital and just see what kind of sketchy stuff they're putting out on the pager network. Because one, you'll be surprised and not trust them anymore, and two, you'll be able to kind of get out there and really get a feel for what's going on, what sort of information and data is flying around you all the time that you're not really privy to, right? Like I don't think people realize how much RF energy they're just bombarded with, and how much of it can be easy to just grab and do stuff with.
Yeah, I agree full force. I also wanted to, because while you were talking about being next to something and being able to record it and see what's going on with it, I've really been loving the Flipper Zero, which is an awesome device
Oh
that was put
man.
out here by, I'm not sure actually who it was put out by off the top of my head. Let me see if I can look that guy up real quick. Even if I can't, though, it's an awesome little multi purpose tool that's probably about the size of a key fob. And they have been out kind of perpetually because they made their rounds initially on a Kickstarter, and they are available right now for about 170 bucks, and shipping will happen sometime I think late in August. But what it allows you to do, it has on it both an IR transmitter and receiver, uh, one wire protocol, a bunch of GPIO, a sub gigahertz radio, a couple other things I'm probably forgetting out about right now. But so far, it's been incredible to see on the Discord, as well as in general on the subreddit and things like that, the things that people have been able to do. I think a buddy of ours from work had shared a recent project where they were brute forcing. What is that protocol called? The
Oh man, I'm totally spacing it. I know what you're talking about too. Let me see if I can look it up real quick.
I think
That
it's
is the wrong conversation.
the T119, the T119 pager systems. So those are the pager systems
Yep.
that you normally see out there at, like, I don't know, Panera Bread or any type of eating establishment that has a paging system. But originally, I think that there was a guy, Shotokan, who had shared out an example of it on Twitter, where he was brute forcing the paging system to be able to make them all go on at once. And I don't know if I would necessarily
Yep.
recommend it,
If
but I
you
mean, this is a kind of hacky reverse engineering type show. So I'm not a lawyer. And you're an adult, so hopefully, and you can make your own choices on whether or not you want to get involved in doing anything.
we're not
Go ahead.
say we're not condoning these actions, and we don't recommend you try them, but you should know that they exist.
And they're pretty funny. That's also important to note. I think that in addition to that, I've seen some funny stuff like popping the doors open on the access port for Teslas. I guess normally when you approach one of the charging stations, there's like an unauthenticated, maybe 425 megahertz. I'm probably wrong on that, but somewhere around that range message that goes out to be able to open the door so that you can just go back and charge your vehicle. But somebody captured that, and it's got a little spectrum analyzer too, which I think is hilarious on the Flipper Zero, and you can record that and then play it back. If it's something that doesn't use rolling codes, or even if it does have rolling codes, in the case of the T119, I think they were able to quickly go through a large series of, or exhaust the space for what the possibilities are for the roll. And yeah, generally have some fun hacky times. I've just started to scratch the surface of what that little guy is capable of, but I am loving every second of playing with it.
Yeah, I need to get around to picking me up one of those. I'm gonna pick up a radio first, I think, but I've got some. I think I have one of those Flipper Zeros in my future.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a hack like little random NFC things for my Wii or my Switch rather.
Oh, that's another good one. Yeah. Grabbing there are allegedly some databases out there of all of the NFCs that are associated with all of the Switch amiibos, and you can replay those too. There's also building entry ones that people out there on Twitter have been showing. Uh, I think that BLE is maybe coming soon. I think there's some other stuff coming soon. There's a couple of different hardware revisions out there, but anyway, spoken on a lot about them. Check out their website, check out their Discord, and see all the fun possibilities that exist. I think outside of that, you want to talk software real quick, and then we can wrap it up. Some of the usual suspects that we like to use.
Sure. I'm definitely down for that.
So,
I've used software before.
one software, please. In my very first foray into trying to kick around things at a lower level, some of my favorite projects I saw were from a guy named Denis Yurichev. I think he's a Russian guy. He has a site out there, beginners.re. And for a while, I think it was behind a paywall. I'm not sure if it still is now. But at the time, he had a PDF guide that existed out there where he chronicled his early journey in going through and doing reverse engineering by doing something that's still near and dear to my heart, which is like a make it break it type of approach where he would make the project in C and then compile it and then try to pull it apart in GDB and take a look at it. And he got to the point where he could recreate the same types of programs in just writing assembly itself and getting to understand the real solid logistics of whatever assembly language it is that you can compile for. And I'm sure between his time in the 90s of doing that and now, there's a lot that you can do from just your own computer with cross compiling and QEMU. And you can even go on, I think it's Godbolt, the site that has a lot of the different compilers, and see how a program that you'd be creating would get compiled down using different types of compilers, some of the optimizations that it has, or even if you're doing it with like GCC on the command line yourself, you could pass in different levels of optimization and see how the compiler changes your C program down into machine code that the computer can understand. But anyway, shout out to him, Denis Shirachev, for that work. Modernly, too, I know that out there, Azeria has some good ARM content, and then Live Overflow, the YouTube channel, he has really great content out there too, which is really inspirational to, I think, a new generation of people coming up with a lot of resources. Like even having YouTube, gosh, if I had YouTube, 25 years ago, man, that would have been incredible. Or I would have, spent a lot of time watching video game uh, reviews or something, like playthroughs instead. Who knows? But in any event,
Probably.
yeah, Denis
To be
Shirachev,
honest.
Azeria, and I think also RPI-SEC, the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. They have some great content out there for modern binary exploitation. But the point that I'm getting at is the first kind of entry there. I think for a lot of people could be like GDB, the GNU debugger, along with something like Gef installed, or not. If you really want to go hard mode, Dark Souls mode, using GDB without Gef is the way to go. If you want to have the ability to see your stack and where your program counter is and things like that on each iteration, there's ways to do that with like a hook stop. But GDB would be kind of the thing you probably wouldn't always normally use, especially on user space programs, but it's something that you may have to rely on, especially for lower level stuff. And then IDA Pro, I mean, would you see necessarily a use case in using IDA these days? I mean, I guess if you can
So
afford it, right?
yeah, I think IDA's still great, and it's still got a lot of great use cases. But for the home gamer, I can't see using it over Ghidra at this point. You know what I mean? Unless it's
Yeah.
got some other stuff that you need, right? Like it's got really good processor modules and everything, and I don't know. I find it a little bit more intuitive than Ghidra,
Yeah.
but also it is like 8 million times more expensive than Ghidra. So I usually just use Ghidra. Obviously, I think the big thing for me is like learning to use Ghidra and GDB together, especially if you've got a device that can be that can JTAG and start a GDB server. So that alongside knowing how to use Ghidra, set up data structures and stuff like that inside of there is probably the thing that I would say is been helping me the most recently, because it's, man,
Yeah.
learning those programs is not like you can't just sit down at it and read the documentation and probably be good, right? Like a book or a guide or something is basically the most certain way to go, in my opinion, especially when it comes to like ARM and embedded stuff. Or anything where it starts aliasing, obviously, and it's referencing memory stuff from like a static image where you're just like, ah, fuck, I don't know where this is. Like,
Yeah.
what's this doing at 9 million? All right, we don't know what's here, but uh,
Yeah, I agree with that.
those are the two that I would definitely, as well as some stuff like binwalk and strings. What is it, strings.py?
Yeah.
Um, Stuff like that, I think are pretty great tools as well to just. If you've got a file and you just like, what is in it? Like, I need to know what in the world is in this firmware upgrade file.
Yeah.
I think you can't really beat some of that stuff for it.
On the Windows side, I know that there in the sysinternal suite, there's also like a strings utility. I think it really also depends on where you're at, because on the Windows side too, if you've got a Windows executable, so like let's say for example you have an embedded system that has some sort of, it comes with some software that's like got an MFC application, let's say, that talks to the device over serial, and you wanted to take a look at that software, there's WinBag, um, as well as certain plugins for Ghidra. Like for example, huge shout out to OO Analyzer for doing C++ RE, because being able to recover both the class name for C++, excuse me, along with the recovering some of the functions, the virtual functions too, without having to go through and look at the table yourself, is just clutch in making a very heavy lift much lighter. I think also too something that's
Yeah.
interesting on the user space side, in addition to kind of getting to know which tools are best for which operating system or which target, binary you're taking a look at. There's a really fascinating project, I think, that was stopped, but it was the interactive Delphi reconstructor, IDR. And for things, so I don't know if you remember, Dell, but back in the day in the early 2000s, when Boost was still really common, and a lot of the features that are in like C++ 11 and 14 and 17 and whatnot didn't exist. There were some other companies who had made like third-party libraries for C++ and like different frameworks and graphical frameworks and things like that weren't WinAPI. It was just their own thing. And Borland Delphi was one of those, which I think is now Embarcado. But if you can find out there on some of the darker sides of the internet, or search in the high seas, you can find a lot of the different libraries that came along with like Delphi. You can download those and point IDR to them, and then you'll be able to get like decompilation of those types of binaries. And even like there's some screens that you can take a look at which show you the actual like GUI elements, and man, it makes taking a look at those things so much better.
Yeah. So some of those libraries, especially like Boost, but also anything .NET. Oh my
Yeah.
God, man, those are such a pain to go back and go through.
Do you have a preference,
I think
DNSpy
I
or
also would.
ILSpy?
I really don't, honestly.
Yeah, it's about the same. I think there's some others too. I just don't
I
recall.
Yeah, I don't remember either. I want to say, man, I probably just Google it and try a different one every time. So yeah, I haven't really dug deep into in either of them yet, or any of them really. I just do because there's another one too for Java that I don't remember the name of, where it kind of does the same thing. It takes stuff apart for you, so it's easier to see what's going on. And I always just kind of Google it. As well as what is that really popular? Um, It is I can't remember the name of the program, so great. I'm being real helpful, but I used it in one of the challenges off that website where they just give you random stuff to hack. Um, I'm
Oh, was it
totally
one of the
spacing names now.
older?
Apparently, I'll remember how to.
So yeah, in addition to the beginners.re, which is
Oh, hack the box.
yeah, there's Hack the Box, beginners.re. There used to be one hosted in Germany as well for downloading RE challenges. I think though we probably separate that like where the typical places are maybe in another episode, because I think we're pushing probably about an hour 17 so far.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
If we want to, yeah. You want to just we can wrap it up there.
Yeah, it sounds good. We're I think at about the right length. Also, I'm at about the right level of hungry.
Same here. So yeah, I think we'll call it a day for that. And the next one probably going to have some wrap up from DEF CON 30. And then after that, we'll probably take a look at some of the other stuff we had talked about in here and see what's up next. Maybe emulators or getting into some more of the tooling.
Ooh, I'd definitely like to dig into emulators. I have been bad about getting good at those.
Well, sweet. Thanks for anybody who's listening. This has, I think, been our good, successful first episode, and hopefully the first one of many more to come. All right, later.
I don't have anything significant to say.
repp.show. Nerd Talk IO.